Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Baki Talki. We've had a lot of exciting episodes so far. This one goes off in a different direction if there's any Doyle fans out there, but still some fun things that happen. Before we jump into it, let's introduce our co host for the episode, Christian. Say hi, Christian.
Hi, Christian.
Oh my God, Catherine made the same joke last week. I'm gonna have to come up with a different intro. So, Christian, before we get into the episode, I have a few questions I like to ask all my guests. So, first off, just so people can get a taste of your palate,
Okay.
what are the current shows that you're watching other than Baku?
Recently watched Severance. Been rewatching a bit of I Think You Should Leave, which is I think both of those are about as far removed from Baki as humanly possible. Recently watched Our Flag Means Death. Rewatched some Arrested Development.
Ooh, which season?
One.
Yeah, good call. All right, so you're watching some pretty highly revered TV right now, including Baki, of course. Before watching this episode, what did you know about Baki?
I know that I knew it was a fighting anime because that's basically what you told me. That it's my impression was that it was going to be more like a sort of tournament arc type thing, but so far I haven't. I mean, the episode I watched definitely didn't seem that way. So I
Nah,
don't know why they're all fighting, but
we so there are tournament arcs in Baki, but the current arc is very much like it's not a real fight if it's on the mat. You know, it's you gotta get down and dirty in the real world.
To hell with the place, the time, or any kind of rules. When you have to fight, you fight. Whenever, wherever. Whether you're eating, sleeping, screwing, taking a dump. That's what real combat's about.
Let's jump right into the episode. So last week, where we left things off, Doyle had jumped into Baki's high school classroom. A pretty amazing feat of athletics. So in this episode, Christian, walk me through how this episode starts off.
so it starts with. Well, honestly, before even the action started, I was kind of caught off guard that this was a Netflix original, honestly. I don't know why. I just
It's a
it struck
stamp
me.
of quality right there.
Yeah, it honestly made me wonder if this is what's tanking them so badly. Yeah, it was one of the most static action scenes I think I've ever seen. It was just it opened on the two of them in like a very strange pose and just kind of slowly drifting away from each other. And then they flipped and they were on the ground and the fight just kind of ended.
Yeah.
And then he pulled out a protractor that had an X-Acto knife attached to it.
Well, I've always seen a school classroom as very safe, but Doyle within seconds had found two sharp objects to use to intimidate Baki,
A
and
regular
then
Amy Adams.
what is that a reference to?
The show Sharp Objects.
That show is actually mostly about protractors. I'm a big fan of it. That's why I had to ask what it is. So yeah, so Baki, of course, doesn't want to fight because he likes to pretend that he's an average high schooler among his high school peers. And so he jumps out of a two-story window, much like an
Very
Avenger.
average. Very average.
It is sort of funny. Like, I guess it would be much more suspicious if Baki, like, had a very high skill kung fu fight with a guy who just jumped into the classroom. But it's still pretty weird that he was able to jump out of a two-story window and then jog away.
Yeah, he also landed like really weird. Like he landed almost like a like crouch position, but like not like superhero landing. Like he had both of his feet on the ground and like knees just sort of bent. Like the shot was basically just like his face and crotch. I didn't like it.
Yeah. What was
The
interesting.
animation style in this, sorry, is terrible.
Oh, I was thinking the same thing. I think that I meant to look it up before the episode. This is a moment for editor Steve to cut in. But I think that this was a different studio than the other episodes. This was an ugly episode. Hey there, editor Steve here. Every episode of Baki is animated by the same studio. I don't know why this one just looks worse.
Yeah, one of the first things I noticed was how gross their hands looked.
It's too bad you missed Hanayama. He had ginormous hands the last episode. But yeah, no, nobody looks good in this episode. But before we move on past Doyle, I just wanted to note, you didn't see this, but Doyle jumped, like a standing jump, 2 stories into the air to get into this classroom. But for some reason, he didn't feel like jumping down to follow Baki.
I guess they just kind of forgot that he can jump.
It's the Game of Thrones writers' approach. So anyway, if anybody wanted to see the conclusion to the thrilling Baki Doyle subplot, I don't think it's ever going to happen, but it doesn't happen right now. So we move on. Baki starts jogging around the school, and he walks into the gardener who is gardening the school,
He has a nice little exchange with him. He's like, hi.
Oh, hey, how's it going?
Hello.
And he keeps walking.
I was hoping you'd bring that up. He says exactly, oh, hey, how's it going? Like, that was a real window into Baki's character. Like, he seems very friendly with the staff.
Yeah, it's not only is he not an average high school student, he's actually a nice high school student.
Maybe he's just like an old soul, Like he feels like he's a peer to this gardener.
He sounds like he's 30, so he has the voice of like a fairly heavy smoker.
When I had Jack on, he described the classroom as a bunch of high school students with a 26-year-old man sitting in the back.
Mm-hmm. No, that's about right.
So, do you want to describe what happens with the kindly gardener?
Well, he walks past him a little bit after saying, how's it going? And his spidey sense goes off, and the gardener throws a fucking scythe at him.
No way I'm going back to class now. Huh? What?
Baki Hanma. We meet again.
Yep. So this gardener, for listeners of the podcast, this is Ryuko Yanagi, one of the 5 death row inmates. This was the guy who blew somebody's brains out with his lungs, if you remember back in episode 1. And he was pretending to be a gardener at Baki's school so that he could throw scythes at him. What did you think of Yanagi?
I think he had too many gimmicks.
100%.
And I'm not sure if this is a normal thing with this show, but it certainly seems like they were just like, hey, they found a list of old cool weapons that were like just a little obscure. And we're like, okay, we're going to include all of these. And then they got to this guy and they had kind of given all of the other guys like sort of cool weapons. So they were just like, I guess he gets like spinny scythes and a little like cat claw. And also the ability to like kill people with, well, I'm sure you'll get to that bit, but
yeah, no, it's like he has spinning scythes, he has like a weird claw in his hand, and he's called Yanagi the Poisoner, and he can create vacuums with his hand that can break brick walls. And the next time we see him in the next episodes that he shows up, he doesn't use any of that, and he's got a new gimmick. He has like 8 different things. It's ridiculous.
That's bad writing. Bad character design. Stick to one gimmick. Like he had the General Grievous thing with like spinning the sides around, like it's all quick. Gardner Grievous.
Come on. Not here, man.
Your lightsabers will make a fine addition to my collection.
Yeah, Yanagi is completely overloaded. We haven't even gotten into his amazing dental work, but we'll get there.
Oh boy, I cannot wait. I have a lot of thoughts.
So yeah, well, not too much happens before then. So Baki, of course, says, "How's it going?" Walks by him, Spidey sense scythe, and then Yanagi reveals himself. So Baki and Yanagi met at the big confrontation, but they've never spoken to each other. So Yanagi starts swinging his scythes around like they're helicopter blades. Baki is able to dodge them because he looks at the man throwing it instead of the blade. Pretty standard martial arts.
A chain and rope weapon is difficult to evade because the blades are moving faster than the eye can follow. The mistake for the target is thinking he can dodge the blades by watching them.
Yeah, but a much better way is to keep track of the guy who's throwing them.
Clever.
Yeah, I was gonna say that they talk about that like it was like a good move, but it's like, yeah, this is kind of how you fight. Like that's like rule number one.
Don't act like you wouldn't have been instantly beheaded in this fight, Christian.
Oh, I definitely would have, but I'm just saying, like the rule with anything like that is like keep an eye on like, what the person is doing. Like even in like most sports, it's like, yeah, you got to pay attention to like what they're doing. You don't just like watch the racket. You watch what the person is doing holding the racket.
So after Baki defeats the spinning scythe technique, we get greeted by the third big player of this episode with Baki and Yanagi, Goki Shibukawa, the man who can throw anybody. And he enters the fight by throwing a cold pot of water at Yanagi. I want to get your thoughts on this scene, Christian, especially out of context. This must have been quite interesting.
The old cold for hot pot trick. Classic prank. It honestly, there's a clip from, I want to say it's the Thomas Jane Punisher movie. I can't remember though. One of the Punisher movies. Not one of the it wasn't the series. It wasn't the kind of actually somewhat good one. But he's like torturing, quote unquote, this guy. He has him like strung up upside down and he can't see him. And he like is like using a blowtorch on a piece of metal to make it look like, or to like sort of give the illusion that he's like heating something up. And then he like presses a popsicle into his back. And the whole thing is just sort of like, oh, your body doesn't really distinguish well between like extreme temperatures when you're expecting one versus the other. So it is just sort of like psychological torture.
Sorry, this is the Punisher? It sort of sounds like something the Punisher would do.
I know. It's kind of a weird, like, I mean, I guess I don't know the full context of the scene. I really can't remember, but like, I guess the guy wasn't, bullet worthy or whatever. The Punisher just seems to like, yeah, it was like a minor thing.
Yeah.
He just needed information out of him. But yeah, it weirdly reminded me of that, and I was kind of expecting that to be what they were gonna bring up, because it seems like they have to explain fucking everything in this show. But
explaining costs a lot less than fights.
They barely animate the mouths at all anyway, so.
Yeah, so Goki Shibukawa throws a cold pot of water at Yanagi. Yanagi goes like, ah, and then realizes it's cold. Quite embarrassing, honestly.
Yanagi, payback's a bitch. Careful.
What the? It's cold.
And then, they, as Shibukawa points out, this might be the greatest tag team of all time.
As the expression goes, Yanagi, you're trapped between Scylla and Charybdis. You might be facing the greatest tag team of all time.
Baki and Shibukawa versus Yanagi.
A shirtless high schooler and a old man with a teapot.
Both of them like under 5'5". Yeah.
I mean, if you're under 5'5", you've got a lower center of gravity, which enables you to throw people farther.
Yes. And to be honest, as far as I know, this is the greatest tag team of all time, because we don't get a lot of tag teams in this show. But before we get into that, so they knock Yanagi on his ass, and we get one of the, honestly, on reflection, I think one of the most pointless and random segues in this show, where we meet with Japan's top dentist,
Mitsuomi Hasegawa, age 71, Director of the Dental Association of Japan, Doctor of Medical Dentistry, Doctor of Sports Dental Occlusion, and author of Body Culture and Bite Force, among other works.
Who walks us through an interesting theory for the next 3 minutes. Can you tell me about this this segment?
Yeah. So basically, his theory is that you're just kind of better if you grind your teeth. Top athletes, remarkable chompers is, I think, like the crux of his quote there was
That's
like
that's
he had just
basically an
studied.
exact quote.
In other words, I found the top athletes have some serious chompers.
Yeah, he had like studied every like top athlete in every sport, and they all had like amazing teeth. And then he found this one prisoner who had like worn down all of his molars and like basically ground them down to dust. And apparently that was like a good thing. It wasn't really clear. They kind of implied that like just having strong teeth was a good thing, and then this guy who had been like breaking his teeth, clenching so hard, apparently that was even better. It's not, considering they had this as an aside to explain things, it really didn't explain anything.
But that was
It
the
was just
that,
it was
that
just
was
really confusing.
that was the thing. Yanagi doesn't like bite people or anything. Like he's not. It doesn't even seem like he's particularly strong. Like it's not like he has like the strongest punch or anything. He's just a guy who apparently grinds his teeth at night.
Yeah, it's I mean, like if he were to bite people, he would probably be less effective than other combatants.
I did want to add in here because I looked this up. There is a 1994 Japanese science paper I found that does say that good athletes have stronger bite force than the general population. So this was not made up, and I think that the author read an article and then decided to put it into an issue.
I mean, okay. It doesn't really change the fact that the scene was absurd, but yeah, it's vaguely scientifically accurate. I don't think anything else about what happened here was, but you know, it's cool that he was like, you know, incorporating some science.
No, I think that's unfair. I think everything in this episode is scientifically accurate, especially once we start getting into oxygen.
Yeah, the deadliest poison.
They call me Yanagi the Poisoner because I use the deadliest gas, oxygen. This episode is, I have to say, the least. So little happens in this episode compared to every episode before it. We spend, I would say, 90% of this episode behind the school where Yanagi was gardening. We never leave this area after we arrive there, other than to hear from Japan's top dentist.
Yeah, it's basically just flashbacks are the only time we're out of this space after he jumps out of the building.
So yeah,
I mean, it still felt like it was moving like really fast. Like a lot of bullshit just kind of kept getting flung at the wall. But plot-wise, like story-wise, not a lot happened.
I wanted to get your thoughts on the animation style. This is the second episode we've had where it cuts to CG in the middle of the fight. On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give the CG?
Low, like a 3. I don't know. It's better that honestly. I think about like some of the old like Nickelodeon shows, and even like Futurama occasionally had like they had sequences where they had to like pan around something, so they would do like sort of a 3D animated version of the character, but like it always was just a 3D version of a character that was meant to be designed for 2D, so it always looked wrong.
Yeah,
but I feel like here in a small way it almost works better because the show's default animation style is so gross that you kind of welcome a change, even if it's not a particularly good one.
Yeah, it's Baki has a very distinctive style in any episode, and this is the ugliest episode so far. Well, it just in general quality. Last episode we had the guy with 3 mouths because his face exploded, which was pretty ugly, but it was quite well animated in my opinion. Yeah, I thought that the 3D fights were once again horrible, and I can't wait until they drop that in season 2. I think we're getting to the best part of the episode where Yanagi explains the way of the void. I want to get your thoughts on, first off, Christian, what is the way of the void? And do you think it's possible? Do you think it's a real fighting technique you could use?
Well, it's definitely very far removed from any martial arts.
It's a dark martial art.
Yes. 100%. Apparently, if you clench your jaws tight enough, you can create a vacuum in your hands that allows you to punch through solid concrete. And if you put the vacuum over someone's mouth, you suck enough oxygen out of the air that they're breathing in, and it knocks them unconscious or kills them.
Now, I should add here that this is actually what happens to Baki. Yanagi walks up and places his hand over Baki's mouth, creating a vacuum with less than 6% oxygen, knocking out Baki instantly, potentially almost killing him.
Now, I don't think it's possible to generate vacuum like that. I'm not a vacuum expert. I have watched The Expanse, but the vacuum in that is space. No one really just pops a vacuum out of their hand.
Now, here's the thing. If I had never heard of martial arts and somebody said, I'm going to karate chop through this board, first of all, I'd say, what's a karate chop? But secondly, I'd say it's impossible. Maybe being able to create vacuums with your hand is just something that, seems impossible because I don't do martial arts. Do you have any training in the martial arts?
No, but I mean, isn't like doing an armpit fart kind of creating a vacuum? Like cupping.
Wait, Christian, you said you didn't have any training in the martial arts.
No, I'm just thinking about this more now. Obviously, there could be a martial art combat application to.
The thing is, you'd have to get somebody to breathe your armpit fart afterwards, and you'd have to get your armpit fart to be exactly 6% oxygen contact.
Yeah, I mean, if the thing about a lot of martial arts, as far as I understand them, is that they're not like necessarily made for fighting. It's more of just sort of like performance based. So, maybe there is a non-combat sport version, like a martial art that is not combat focused, that does involve armpit farting vacuums.
It's quite possible. We'll have to look into that. All right. So, Yanagi. Listeners might remember that in episode 1, he kept trying to ask people what the most poisonous gas is.
Let me ask you two a question. Out of all the gases on the planet Earth, what's the most poisonous? The answer is oxygen. But once you've figured that out, it's already too late. That is the way of the void. Yes, the thing that gave me the name Yanagi the Poisoner was oxygen, the deadliest gas of them all. But also the one we must breathe to live. Ironic, isn't it?
Of course, it turned out to be oxygen. It turns out that if you breathe in one breath of oxygen below 6%, you instantly go unconscious. I looked this up, much like I looked the dentist stuff up. I found nothing even close to this, so I don't believe this is true. I don't know if you thought this was true or not, Christian.
No. I mean, I would imagine that if you had like sustained sort of low oxygen levels, that you would go unconscious. Like, you've got to bring oxygen when you're climbing a mountain, right? Like, or at least a big enough mountain, or like, going high enough up in the sky, you got to have oxygen tank. But I don't think one breath of 6% oxygen is gonna be enough. You might get a little woozy, but
no, I agree.
Probably not even that.
Well, you know what happens when people go up to Everest. The big risk is there's actually Yetis who will run up and put their hand over your mouth, and so if you aren't wearing your oxygen mask, you could get knocked out instantly at those high elevations.
That explains a lot.
That is the way of the void.
As far as I know, even if you were to inhale pure vacuum, you wouldn't necessarily die after just one breath either.
Yeah, I agree. It's
sort
of ridiculous.
Yeah, vacuum is fucking dangerous, but it's not like you're just dead the second you touch it. It's bonkers. Yep. Especially, it's not even like he's actually putting him in a vacuum. He's just cupping his mouth and making him breathe 6% oxygen.
great. It's honestly the goofiest power of all of the death row inmates in this arc, and the rest aren't exactly serious powers either.
That's why they gave him so many other fucking gimmicks.
Yes. Well, he didn't even do his coolest trick, which is blowing somebody's brain out through their ear. And I'm disappointed he didn't do that again.
Well, they didn't want to kill off Baki.
Okay, yeah, that would have been pretty hardcore. That would have been like Game of Thrones. You just blow Baki's brain out in episode 7.
Yeah, this was 7.
Oh,
You need to put a little editor's note in there. Yeah, I mean, they maybe could have killed the old man.
Oh, not
That would have been
Goku.
dramatic.
Oh, he's the bomb. Yeah, but so in case you guys haven't pieced it together yet, Yanagi poisons, or whatever we want to call it, Baki, knocking him out instantly. So if anybody was finally waiting for like a real Baki fight, you get about, I'd say, 8 seconds of it in this episode, and then Yanagi puts his hand over his mouth and ends the fight. Would you describe that as satisfying, Christian?
No. Baki just kind of let it happen. It was weird. He just like stopped fighting and let the guy walk up to him.
Don't let your guard down, Baki. Be alert, Baki.
There's sarin gas and carbon
What the hell is he
dioxide,
talking about?
both of which are
I mean, the
extremely
guy just
poisonous.
won't shut up.
Cyanide
Attack!
prove fatal for them to die.
Touch his mouth and knock him out.
Yeah, I think he said something like, what's he even talking about?
Yeah. And like he could have achieved the same effect with like, I don't know, ether or something. Like they could have just had it like, yeah, oh, he's not like trying to kill him. He's just like poisoning him with like, you know, a knockout gas.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but why would you?
Didn't need to use They didn't need to come up with this contrived bullshit.
Christian,
They could have just used real drugs.
Christian. If only you knew what the most deadliest gas was, you wouldn't even be asking these questions. But yeah.
Also, I wanted to just point out that when they're doing their little like explanation of this vacuum technique, when he goes on about like it can even knock out the strongest of men or whatever, the like weird like dream model that they have demonstrating this just has a dick and balls. Like he's just got his nuts out.
It's important. It's important to see that.
Why?
It's a martial arts thing, Christian.
Okay.
It's a Baki thing. So that's more or less the end of the episode, folks. Yanagi knocks out Baki, and then before he can finish off or fight Shibukawa, the police come and he has to leave. Or he feels like leaving, honestly, because we all know he could easily knock out the entire police department. The Baki police department already got their ass handed to them by a 97-year-old man, so...
How did they get these people into death row in the first place?
Honestly, I got the vibe that they all wanted to taste defeat, and so they got themselves arrested. Because literally, like, one guy got hanged, another guy got electrocuted. It just didn't work. These guys are built different, so to speak.
Well, they grind their teeth, clearly.
Exactly. So, that was an episode of Baki. It was certainly an episode. I have two outro questions for you, Christian. First off, I like to get a definition of a character from each person on the podcast. So I figured for this episode, there's no better character than Yanagi. So if you had to define Ryuko Yanagi for me in like a brief sentence or two, how would you define him?
He's just got too much going on. He's just a mess.
A mess that has too much going on. That's fair.
He's just a
I think
clusterfuck,
that's a super
ultimately.
fair description. All right. Last question for you, Christian. Now that you've watched an episode, is Baki a good show?
No.
We just got our first yes last week, and one word answered no. That's harsh.
Nothing happened this episode, but it was so much nonsense.
I will say, I think you have had the worst episode of anybody so far. Yanagi sort of sucks. Don't worry, though, the listeners. We're not going to stick on this plot line for long. But yeah,
apparently they don't stick to anything for very long.
Oh, you're hurting my heart there. All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show anyway. I hope you enjoyed at least the process of watching this episode.
It is fun to go into it with absolutely no context and just try to figure out what the fuck's going on. I don't think I did, but
well, that's the joy.
I definitely didn't know what was going on in the first scene.
That's the joy of it, Sometimes it's the journey and not the solution of the mystery. And so that's the thought we'll leave on there. Before I sign off, one thing I just found out, I think that following the podcast and leaving a comment actually matters for how this podcast is promoted. So if you feel so inclined, please feel free to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or whatever your podcast app may be. And if you think the show's good, feel free to leave a review. Currently, the only review is me saying that I like my own show, which doesn't hold a lot of sway. Anyway, that's all the Baki we got to talkie. Were you going to say something, Christian?
I was just going to say that's clearly a conflict of interest.
Well, that's the charm. Anyway, see y'all next week.
Goodbye.
Na, na,